29th April 1945, Wassenaar, Netherlands, 10:15 CET. Over the flat spring fields near The Hague, an RAF Avro Lancaster BI from No. 3 Group Bomber Command drops not bombs but 180 food canisters. In London, Bomber Command ledgers for that morning list 242 aircraft dispatched, carrying over 500 tons of rations, flour, tinned meat, dried peas, powdered milk. On the ground, Dutch civilians, many at 50% of normal body weight after the hunger winter, a famine that killed 18,000, 22,000 people, stand and watch, some unable to lift their arms. Expectations in late 1944 promised liberation by Christmas. Reality, confirmed in Queen Wilhelmina's government cables, Dutch Red Cross reports, and SAAF memoranda, was starvation, frozen canals, and fields stripped bare for fuel. Reconnaissance photographs show white neutrality sheets spread by families who could no longer walk. A single line in the RAF order of the day marks a turning point. Priority humanitarian mission authorized. Here, food fell like hope, under guns still loaded. September 1944, February 1945, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague. The German transport embargo order arrived on 27 September 1944, typed on Wehrmacht letterhead and distributed through occupation command channels. Rail traffic ceased. Barge routes froze as temperatures dropped to 10 degrees in December. The Dutch Red Cross caloric survey, conducted through hospital networks in January 1945, recorded urban rations below 600 calories per day, less than 1/3 of minimum sustenance. In Amsterdam, the OLVG hospital admitted cases of severe malnutrition. Women weighing 37 kilograms, children collapsing in tram queues, edema spreading through limbs as protein reserves disappeared. Louis de Jong, a young resistance member who would later become a historian at the Netherlands Institute for Oorlogsdocumentatie, kept fragmentary diary notes through the winter. He recorded neighbours burning furniture for heat, families boiling tulip bulbs into bitter paste, and quiet deaths in unheated apartments. His entries avoid emotion. They list facts, dates when the milk ration ended, when the bread line closed, when bodies appeared in doorways at dawn. Princess Juliana, in exile in Ottawa, sent repeated cables to Churchill's office through diplomatic channels. Her words, preserved in Canadian archives, asked for intervention before urban collapse became irreversible. The appeals included medical reports and population projections. Churchill's staff forwarded them to SAAF with marginal notes questioning feasibility. In Leiden, medical files documented a case. An adult female patient admitted in February 1945 with a recorded weight of 37 kilograms. She had walked 3 kilometers to reach the clinic, rested twice, and fainted upon arrival. The attending physician noted her inability to stand without support. She survived. The file includes her name, address, and a follow-up entry from May indicating partial recovery. Allied intelligence bulletins from February 1945 included a section on Dutch urban conditions. One line read, "Urban collapse imminent." The phrase appeared in summaries circulated to planning staff at SAAF headquarters in Versailles. For military planners accustomed to calculating tonnage for ammunition and fuel, civilian hunger became a variable in operational equations. The front had advanced, but the Dutch population, trapped behind German lines in the west, remained cut off. Starvation, the reports noted, was now a military priority. On 21 April 1945, SAAF headquarters transmitted a coded telegram authorizing negotiations with German Army Group H, commanded by Generaloberst Johannes Blaskowitz. The subject: humanitarian food deliveries to occupied Dutch territory. The message, declassified decades later, listed conditions: no German interference, designated drop zones, suspension of anti-aircraft fire, and Allied verification of compliance. Blaskowitz, facing inevitable defeat and aware of civilian suffering, agreed through Swiss intermediaries. His staff transmitted acceptance on 23 April. Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, head of RAF Bomber Command, reviewed the operational directive with evident concern. His command had spent years conducting strategic bombing at high altitude under heavy defense. Now his crews would fly at 400 feet, within range of small arms, over territory still controlled by armed German units. The risk, he noted in a staff meeting recorded in Bomber Command logs, was extreme, but the order stood. General Walter Bedell Smith, Eisenhower's chief of staff, coordinated diplomatic and military channels. His memoranda, preserved in US National Archives, outlined the delicate balance. One German provocation would end the operation, but one Allied deviation from agreed routes could trigger defensive fire. Trust, built on nothing but necessity, held the mission together. In Amsterdam, Dr. Willem Scowink recorded clinical observations in hospital case files. His notes from mid-April described widespread edema, fainting episodes, and metabolic collapse. One entry detailed a 9-year-old boy from Rotterdam, identified in records as E. Bloom, admitted on 14th April with severe weight loss and fluid retention. The child's condition, Scowink wrote, was critical but reversible if rations arrived soon. The margin of survival, he estimated, was measured in weeks. RAF operational planners selected the Avro Lancaster, BI and B-3 as primary delivery aircraft. These 4-engine bombers, powered by Rolls-Royce Merlin XX engines, could carry up to 22,000 pounds. Bomb bay modifications allowed stowage of jute sacks, Hessian bundles, and metal canisters. Loading ledgers from RAF Woodhall Spa listed average payloads of 3,000 pounds per sortie, 65 kilogram flour sacks, 14 kilogram tins of condensed milk, medical glucose packets. Fuel consumption calculations included low altitude profiles and extended loiter time over drop zones. On 23 April 1945, SAAF issued the final authorization. The operational code name was Manna, risk classification, extreme. The briefing room at RAF Woodhall Spa filled before dawn on 28 April 1945. Squadron leader Leonard Trent, VC, whose involvement is documented in No. 1 Group Operations record books, reviewed flight paths, drop altitudes, and recognition signals. Crews listened in silence. Maps showed designated corridors over Wassenaar and Valkenburg. Red circles marked known flak positions. 20 mm flak 38 emplacements, still manned by German units. The agreement, Trent emphasized, required strict adherence to altitude and route. Deviation risked both defensive fire and mission termination. Sergeant Harold Harry Humphreys, a flight engineer with 166 Squadron, spent the afternoon checking Lancaster, NN775. His logbook, preserved in RAF archives, includes notes on engine oil levels, glycol temperatures, and turret mechanisms. He cleaned the Perspex nose panels, inspected control linkages, and verified fuel quantities. Standard pre-flight routine, but the mission's purpose, delivery rather than destruction, created quiet unease among ground crews. One mechanic taped a photograph of his family inside the cockpit canopy, a practice common among bomber crews. The image remained there through multiple sorties. Loading began at dusk. Ground crews stacked sacks and canisters in bomb bay racks, securing each bundle with canvas straps. The weight distribution required careful calculation. Incorrect loading could destabilize the aircraft during low-altitude flight. Manifests listed contents: white flour, dried peas, powdered milk, tinned meat, yeast tablets. Each Lancaster carried approximately 3,000 pounds, calculated to feed several hundred civilians for days. Weather reports recorded overcast skies, temperatures between 4 degrees C and 6 degrees C, and a gusting northeasterly crosswind at 8 knots. Ice risk at altitude was minimal, but low-level turbulence over flat terrain could complicate precise drops. Pilots reviewed approach angles and release points marked on aerial photographs. Flight Lieutenant Wilfred "Wilf" Burnett, pilot of one sortie, noted in his log the contrast between this mission and previous raids over Germany. On bombing runs, altitude provided distance from ground fire. Here, crews would fly low enough to see faces. The psychological shift, he later recalled in an interview, was profound. Bombs destroyed, food sustained, the same aircraft, the same crew, the same risk, but an inverted purpose. At 09:36 on 29th of April 1945, the first wave of Lancasters lifted from English airfields. Bomb bay doors had been modified to release bread. The first Lancaster crossed the Dutch coast at 10:03, according to RAF Form 541 sortie reports. Altitude 400 feet, airspeed approximately 155 in Berlin Pilotis. The crew could see canals, roads, and rooftops with startling clarity. Pilot Wilfred Burnett held the control column steady as turbulence rattled the airframe. The vibration travelled through the metal structure, a constant reminder of proximity to the ground. Below, Dutch police logs from Wassenaar recorded the sound of approaching engines. Civilians emerged from homes, many moving slowly due to malnutrition. Reconnaissance film footage captured by cameras mounted on trailing aircraft shows white sheets spread across fields, the prearranged neutrality signal. Families too weak to wave stood motionless as the bomber stream passed overhead. At the designated release point, the bomb aimer triggered the modified bay doors. Jute sacks tumbled into the slipstream, falling in irregular patterns across tulip fields and open ground. Some burst on impact, releasing clouds of white flour that settled on grass and dirt. Others remained intact, cushioned by soft earth. The smell of fresh flour mixed with the cold spring air, a sensory contrast documented in civilian diary entries. Jannetje Sandleven, a resident of Leiden whose diary is archived at the Netherlands Institute for Oorlogsdocumentatie, wrote of trembling hands as she gathered scattered rations. Her entry for 29th April describes the sound of engines fading, the silence that followed, and the disbelief that the aircraft had not climbed to attack altitude. "We heard them and did not hide," she wrote. "For once, we prayed they would not climb." German flak batteries tracked the aircraft through optical sights but did not fire. Unit logs from Army Group H confirm orders to hold fire unless Allied aircraft deviated from agreed routes. The agreement, negotiated through intermediaries, held. But the crews remained within range of defensive weapons throughout the drop. One Lancaster misgauged height during release and dented the bomb bay door on a low-altitude bounce. Ground maintenance noted the damage in post-flight inspection sheets. The first wave delivered over 500 tons of food across designated drop zones. RAF logs recorded 242 sorties flown. Dutch municipal records documented immediate civilian response. Distribution began within hours, coordinated by local police and resistance networks. The engines receded. The food remained. On 1st May 1945, the United States Army Air Forces joined the relief operation under the code name Chowhound. 8th Air Force directives, preserved in National Archives records, authorized B-17G Flying Fortress bombers to conduct low-altitude food drops over Dutch urban areas. The B-17G, a 4-engine heavy bomber powered by Wright R-1820 radial engines, carried average payloads of 4,000 pounds when configured for supply delivery. Palletized bundles replaced bomb loads. Lieutenant Colonel George S. Brown, who later became Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, participated in Chowhound sorties. His post-war reflections, recorded in official interviews, described the mission as both tactically dangerous and morally necessary. Flight altitudes of 400–450 feet placed crews within small arms range. German coastal defense positions, still armed and operational, required constant vigilance. The directive specified: maintain course, hold fire unless provoked, verify drop accuracy through visual confirmation. Dutch nurse M. van der Poel, working with Red Cross distribution teams in Amsterdam, recorded the arrival of American supply canisters in handwritten logbooks. Her entries listed contents: powdered milk prioritized for children, tinned meat for hospital wards, flour for bakeries attempting to restart production. The ration notebook, archived in Amsterdam municipal collections, includes caloric calculations showing the food deliveries raised daily intake by 400 to 800 calories per person for 1 week, enough to stabilize metabolic collapse. Soundscape documentation exists in USAAF crew debriefings. Pilots describe the deep rumble of radial engines at low power settings, the friction sound of canvas, slings releasing cargo, and spontaneous weeping observed among Dutch civilians on the ground. Ground observers noted cases where recipients collapsed after initial relief, overcome by exhaustion and emotion. Operational risks persisted throughout Chowhound. Fuel reserve margins remained tight due to extended loiter time over drop zones. Coastal flak positions, while under orders to hold fire, represented constant threat. One USAAF incident report documented a brief emergency climb near Rotterdam on 6 May, when a German 20 mm Flak 38 position momentarily armed. The crew increased throttle, cylinder head temperatures spiked, but the guns did not fire. The aircraft returned safely. Between 1 and 8 May 1945, Manna and Chowhound combined delivered approximately 11,000 tons of food. USAAF records list roughly 2,200 B-17 sorties. RAF records list over 3,000 Lancaster sorties. Distribution networks reached an estimated 4.5 million Dutch civilians. The impossible statistic: in 1 week, Allied air forces sustained a population that ground supply lines had been unable to reach for 6 months. Medical case files from Amsterdam hospitals document the physiology of refeeding after prolonged starvation. Dr. Jan G. de Groot, whose famine studies were published in Dutch medical journals in 1947, recorded clinical observations in ward logbooks during late April and early May 1945. His notes describe refeeding syndrome, a metabolic condition triggered when starved bodies receive sudden caloric intake. Electrolyte imbalances caused cardiac arrhythmias, respiratory distress, and neurological symptoms. Some patients who survived the famine died from overeating the first rations. Case file 44M Amsterdam detailed an adult male admitted on 3rd of May with severe edema after consuming an entire loaf of bread within hours of receiving it. The patient's weight had dropped to 48 kilograms before food drops began. Rapid rehydration and glucose intake overwhelmed depleted cellular reserves. Medical staff administered controlled portions of barley broth, monitored pulse and respiration, and restricted solid food for 48 hours. The patient survived, but required extended observation. Nursing records preserved in NIOD archives include a testimony from a ward nurse who described counting spoonfuls of rehydration fluid, whispering the count to maintain precision. The sensory details: smell of barley broth, disinfectant, wool blankets, appear in multiple staff accounts. One nurse wrote, "Some begged for bread, we gave spoonfuls instead." The emotional difficulty of withholding food from starving patients, even from medical necessity, marked the experience of healthcare workers throughout the refeeding period. Dr. L. H. Zuckerman, a British scientific observer attached to Allied medical teams, documented refeeding protocols in field reports. His notes emphasized gradual caloric increase, electrolyte monitoring, and patient education. Many civilians, unaware of metabolic risks, consumed available food rapidly. Distribution teams began including printed instructions with rations, advising slow consumption and warning of medical danger. Janetje Zandleven's diary includes an entry from 5 May describing a neighbor who collapsed after eating multiple ration portions. The neighbor survived, but remained hospitalized for days. Zandleven wrote, "We waited so long for food, now we must wait again to eat it safely." Amsterdam emergency wards reported mortality spikes during the first week of food distribution. The paradox documented in Red Cross summaries was stark. Relief could kill if administered incorrectly. Medical officers faced an enemy no longer solely hunger, but the body's reaction to abundance after months of deprivation. The clinical files closed with notation, "Refeeding syndrome observed, caution essential." Food alone was not enough. Knowledge of how to use it determined survival. RAF Incident Report 0605-1945 documents a near violation of the humanitarian ceasefire over Rotterdam. Lancaster crew from 106th Squadron, including Sergeant Harold Humphreys, on flight engineer duty, reported visual confirmation of German 20mm Flak 38 position near Kralingse Place, rotating toward their aircraft mid-drop. The turret movement, observed through the waist window, lasted approximately 8 seconds before stopping. The crew initiated emergency climb procedures. Throttles advanced, manifold pressure increased, cylinder head temperatures spiked above normal operating range. Humphrey's log, preserved in personal archives, includes a stress notation. Flak armed 1506 hours, held. The metallic tang of adrenaline mixed with the cold smell of high-altitude air rushing through fuselage vents. The aircraft climbed from 420 feet to 100 feet in under 30 seconds, engine noise increasing to a roar that drowned radio communication. The bomb aimer, positioned in the nose, kept his hand hovering over the intercom switch, prepared to call evasive maneuvers. Below, Dutch witness depositions archived in Rotterdam. Municipal records describe the sound of engine pitch change, the sudden increase in power audible from ground level. One witness, a woman sheltering in a cellar yard with her child, noted the child began crying at the engine noise. The mother held the child and watched the aircraft climb through a gap in the clouds. German radio logs from General Oberst Blaskowitz's headquarters include a transmission at 15:08 on 6 May. "Ceasefire holds." The order, relayed through Army Group H communication channels, confirmed the flak position had not discharged weapons. The brief turret movement, later attributed to a junior crew member unaware of standing orders, did not escalate. The commander at the position countermanded arming procedures and filed a disciplinary report. The name of the gunner who briefly tracked the aircraft does not appear in declassified records. The Lancaster descended after confirming no hostile fire and completed the drop at 15:14. Fuel log entries show consumption spiked during the emergency climb, but remained within reserve margins. The sortie returned to base without further incident. Post-flight inspection noted elevated engine temperatures but no mechanical damage. That evening, the crew mess at Woodhall Spa served dinner in silence. Humphrey's log contains no further entries for 6 May. The next entry, dated 7 May, reads simply, "Weather clear, sortie uneventful. German forces in the Netherlands capitulated on 5th of May 1945. General Oberst Johannes Blaskowitz signed formal surrender terms with Lieutenant General Charles Folkers of the 1st Canadian Army at Hotel de Wereld in Wageningen. The document, preserved in Canadian military archives, transferred authority over Dutch territory to Allied command. German troops began disarmament procedures. Occupation formally ended. On 8th of May, Canadian military pattern trucks entered Amsterdam and Rotterdam, carrying supplies forward from depots now accessible by road. Distribution shifted from airdrops to ground logistics, convoys, horse wagons, handcarts. Bread factories, dormant for months due to lack of flour and fuel, restarted operations. A ledger from an Amsterdam bakery, dated 9th May 1945, records the first production run. 840 loaves baked, distributed through municipal ration networks. Janetje Zandlevin's diary entry from 9th of May describes receiving her first full loaf of bread since autumn 1944. She wrote, "I cut one slice and placed the rest on the table. We stared at it for a long time before anyone touched it again." The act of preservation, saving food rather than consuming it immediately, signalled a psychological shift from famine urgency to cautious recovery. Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, present at the Wageningen surrender alongside General Folkers, toured liberated areas in the days following capitulation. His official reports, filed with the Dutch government in exile, described widespread malnutrition, damaged infrastructure, and urgent need for medical supplies. The population, he noted, stood for liberation ceremonies, but many lacked strength to celebrate. A witness testimony archived in Utrecht municipal records describes an elderly man who received his first ration loaf on 10th May. He cut a single slice, ate half, and placed the remaining crumbs in his coat pocket. When asked why, he replied, "For later." The habit of scarcity, ingrained through months of starvation, did not disappear with the arrival of food. Recovery required not only calories, but time for minds to accept that famine had ended. Dutch government announcements on 12th of May declared the hunger winter officially over. Medical statistics showed stabilization of mortality rates. Hospitals recorded declining admissions for acute malnutrition. The bodies of survivors, however, remained too weak for the physical expression of relief that liberation traditionally inspired. The strength to celebrate would return gradually, measured in weeks of sustained nutrition. RAF casualty records for Operation Manna list 7 aircraft lost in related operations during April and May 1945. The losses occurred during ferry flights, maintenance accidents, and one non-combat engine failure over the North Sea. Crew names appear in RAF memorial rolls: pilots, navigators, bomb aimers, wireless operators, gunners, flight engineers, among them an air gunner whose aircraft crashed, returning from a supply mission. His personal effects, catalogued in RAF personal effects cards, included a pocket watch returned to his mother. The watch had stopped at the moment of impact. Dutch famine mortality studies, compiled by the Netherlands Institute for Oorlogsdocumentatie and published in 1947, estimated 18,000 to 22,000 civilian deaths directly attributable to starvation and related diseases during the hunger winter. The study included cause of death records, hospital admissions data, and municipal burial registers. Names, ages, addresses, each statistic represented a documented individual. The figures confirmed what had been apparent in ward ledgers and police reports. Urban populations had approached collapse before Allied intervention. In 1952, the National Institutes of Health published metabolic research based on Dutch famine data. The study documented long-term physiological effects of prolonged malnutrition, including cardiovascular changes, neurological impacts, and developmental effects in children exposed to starvation in utero. The medical legacy of the hunger winter extended decades beyond liberation. Survivor testimony continued accumulating in archives. Henny van Harten Lamantrip, whose diary had recorded tulip bulb meals and cold rooms, wrote in later years of the sound of Lancaster engines, a sound that meant life rather than destruction. Her recollections, preserved in oral history collections, describe the paradox: bomber aircraft brought salvation. George S. Brown, reflecting decades later as USAAF Chief of Staff, noted the humanitarian mission's demonstration of airlift capability. The precedent of Manna and Chowhound informed post-war doctrines regarding air-based logistics, including later operations such as the Berlin airlift in 1948, aviation, proven capable of delivering destruction at scale, had also proven capable of sustaining populations. RAF Bomber Command operational logs closed the Manna entries with summary statistics: sorties flown, tonnage delivered, aircraft serviceability rates. No editorializing accompanied the numbers. The data recorded facts. The conclusion was implicit. Food drops accelerated survival by weeks, bridging the gap until ground supply lines reached isolated populations. The files noted no additional commentary. The figures stood alone, sufficient testimony to what had occurred. Over 4.5 million Dutch civilians received aid through Operations Manna and Chowhound. The combined air missions delivered approximately 11,000 tons of food in 9 days, equivalent to the carrying capacity of roughly 100 fully loaded supply trucks, which could not reach the besieged population due to frontline constraints. The logistics mathematics revealed an operational truth. Aviation projected humanitarian effect at scales and speeds ground transport could not match. The famine toll remained documented in Dutch archives: 18,000 to 22,000 names, each representing an individual who died of starvation or related illness between September 1944 and May 1945. Medical studies traced long-term health consequences in survivors: cardiovascular disease, metabolic disorders, psychological trauma. The hunger winter shaped Dutch national memory, commemorated annually in remembrance ceremonies where aging survivors gather beneath monuments bearing lists of the dead. RAF crew reunion photographs from the 1950s and 1960s show aging airmen seated around tables, empty chairs marking lost comrades. One photograph, archived in Imperial War Museum collections, shows a vacant seat with a flight helmet placed on the chair back, memorial to a flight engineer killed in a post-war accident. The men who flew the missions carried the memory forward, their testimonies recorded in oral histories and memoir fragments. Janetje Zandleven's diary, donated to the Leiden archive in later decades, contains one final entry from May 1945. They brought life. The sentence stands alone on the page, no elaboration, no additional context. The simplicity carries weight, a statement of fact requiring no embellishment. Sergeant Harold Humphreys kept his flight engineer's logbook throughout his post-war life. The pages show where, at the 29th April 1945 entry, crease lines from repeated handling. The log was donated to RAF archives after his death. It remains available to researchers, preserved in climate-controlled storage, alongside thousands of similar documents, the paper record of individual participation in documented events. As communications settled and reconstruction began, military planners archived the flights not as anomaly, but as precedent, proof that in war's final phase, aircraft could deliver sustenance with the same precision once reserved for destruction. The ledgers closed, the records remained. In archives across Britain, the Netherlands, and the United States, the documentation endures. Tonnage delivered, sorties flown, civilians fed, the numbers hold, the memory follows.